Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for December 21st through 27th. This week I read one book, I watched 3 shows, I watched 5 movies, and I listened to 1 book. And I had hair in my mouth through that whole thing. First this week I finally got around to reading The Confessions of Frannie Langton. This is a historical fiction book about this woman born in Jamaica who is later transported to the UK and she is enslaved. In Jamaica she works as a house girl, and once she gets to the UK she is given to a different family, and as we meet her she has been accused of murdering the people she works for. However, she's quite adamant that this couldn't have happened because she was actually in love with the mistress of the house. However, when she was woken up the morning after this occurred, she doesn't remember what happened. From there, we're basically getting her written account of her life, so she actually goes back to when she was living in Jamaica, what that was like, the dynamics of the people in that household, and then we're moving forward into what it was like to come to the UK, and then what it was like being employed, and what it was like falling in love, and then a weird side quest that I didn't see coming, and then leading up to the murders and now the trial. This is a book that was recommended to me by one of my lovely subscribers, so I finally got around to it. Sorry it took so long. And I didn't really look into it too much going into it. I just knew it was kind of a murder mystery because the cops think she did it, but she doesn't think she did it, and we have to try to figure out who did it. But instead of really heavily focusing on that, we had all this preamble that I didn't really expect. All of that being said, by the end of it, I did really enjoy it. The writing was really good. I enjoyed the writing style. And it's really not this book's fault that it wasn't exactly what I expected, especially because I didn't look into it whatsoever before actually reading it. On to the shows I watched this week, the first one being the first episode of Pluribus. This was a very interesting first episode of a TV show. Our main character in this one is this woman who is a writer, and we see her on a book tour, and she's talking about, I think, the 4th installment in whatever fantasy thing she's writing, and she's got all these different people who really love her writing, and then once we see her get into the car after all of this, she's just like, ugh, I write crap and people read crap and I hate that I'm writing crap. Which is really reminiscent actually to an author from a completely different book genre that I read recently. I'm not going to wreck it for you because it's kind of a spoiler. It's kind of a motivation for that author to do some things that they did. But wow, it was interesting to encounter that kind of person again so shortly. In any case, while that's going on, we know that there's something science-y happening and there's this countdown clock that keeps happening. So I think the clock that we see at the beginning of the episode is somewhere around a year away, and then we keep seeing it counting down and getting closer and closer to 0. And we know that somebody has kind of breached containment on this thing that they're studying, and that all comes to a head with this author character because all of a sudden everyone around her starts being affected by something and she's not affected by it at all, and it brings up a lot of interesting questions. I thought it was a really interesting opening to a series, and it could go some really, really interesting ways. However, I watched it at my aunt and uncle's on a streaming service that I don't have, so I probably won't continue, but who knows, maybe in the future. The next show I watched was the 2nd episode of Jet Lag for the 16th season, which again I watched on Nebula, so that episode won't be out until this coming Wednesday. Which means I'm not going to spoil for you where somebody was hiding. However, I am going to tell you a really funny thing about it, because eventually they do say the location. They don't tell you at the beginning of the episode because that's silly, but eventually we do find out where this one person is hiding. And I'm like, I've heard of that place before, but maybe it's just one of those UK names that I've just heard of before. There's many of them, and there's many that we've stolen in Canada and we have them in Canada. I'm like, oh, that name came from there, okay. And it wasn't until later that evening when I started listening to the audiobook that I'm currently listening to that I went, oh, this series I've been listening to this year is partially based in that town. That's why it sounded so familiar. So I personally got a really good chuckle out of that, and I added it to my adventures map because I was already thinking it sounded like a cute town that I didn't necessarily know if it was real or not, because fiction sometimes just makes up random English towns. But now having seen it in Jet Lag, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna have to add it to my adventures map and one day go there because it looks cute. The other show I watched this week is the latter half of the 1st season of Save Me, and this ends in such a devastating way. I can't really tell you because you're gonna have to watch it for yourself, but I am very excited to get into the 2nd series is all I can say. If you missed me talking about this last week, it's about this guy who only met his daughter once. He didn't even really meet her. He found out when she was 3 that she existed, and the mother was like, hey, can you sign over parental rights so my husband can actually adopt her formally? And he's like, sure, I didn't know I had a kid until now. And then we flash forward 10 years later to the present where she has gone missing and everybody thinks it was him because there was somebody online pretending pretending to be him to lure her away. Now nothing will stop him from trying to figure out where she is and to get her back home to her mother. It's brilliant and twisty, and I very much enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to watching the second series as well. As for movies, I watched 5 of them. However, I'm only going to talk to you about one of them in depth because all the other ones are ones that I have watched before, and since I've been doing this for 9 years, I've probably talked about each of these films at least a few times because I tend to watch them during this holiday period. So the movies I rewatched this week were Love Actually, Home Alone, Gremlins, and The Holiday. Now Gremlins is probably the one that I've never talked about on this channel that I will briefly talk about here, and then I'll talk about the one that I had never seen before. This one I probably haven't seen since the 90s, and to be honest, I think I mostly watched Gremlins 2 growing up, not necessarily Gremlins 1. I must have watched this at some point, but I definitely remember more scenes from Gremlins 2, so when I think of Gremlins, I think of that one. But it's about this guy. It is a holiday movie because he is looking for a present for his kid, and he ends up getting this mogwai, which is a creature he'd never heard of before. And they come with 3 different rules. Don't get them wet, don't feed them after midnight, and keep them out of bright lights because sunlight will actually kill them. Even though his kid, who he gives this creature to, is very responsible, is actually pretty much the one paying the mortgage in the family because he works at a bank, things happen, chaos ensues. I didn't expect to really talk about that one, but I figured because I've never actually talked about it on this channel, even though it was a rewatch, there you go. The one movie that I had never seen before that I watched this week is called Spirited. This one stars Will Ferrell as the ghost of Christmas Present. He works for Jacob Marlowe, and every year they select somebody on Earth who is kind of a terrible person but can be redeemed, and they spend the whole year figuring out how to turn their life around for the betterment of society. At the beginning of this, we see they've just had Christmas, it worked, it's wonderful, and he's already trying to think of who to move on to for the next year. When they go to check out this one really mean guy who manages a hotel in Vancouver, they come across this other guy who has actually been stamped unredeemable, who is played by Ryan Reynolds. He decides, screw this manager guy, this is the guy we need to get, and he's willing to stake his life so much on this guy that he is willing to retire if they don't pick this guy instead of the other guy. A thing I didn't actually know going into this movie is this is also a musical, and it's the type of musical that makes fun of musicals, and I found that absolutely delightful. This is something that I'm looking forward to actually rewatching every holiday season because it is really good. There were certain aspects about it where I was like, ooh, this is going to happen, this is going to be a kind of a perfect thing to happen, but there were other reveals that I didn't actually see coming and I really enjoyed. And seeing these 2 people who I would never have associated previously with musical theater in this musical theater production together was just fantastic. As for the book I listened to this week, that was Gideon the Ninth. I finally read Lesbian Necromancers in Space. I did it, guys! This is one of those books that starts out with a dramatis personae, and I like seeing that, especially at the beginning of plays, but I know when I get one of those at the beginning of a book, and it's particularly long, and none of the names are names that are really familiar to me, I know I'm gonna forget who's in what house, and I don't really care. That's a me thing. So I spent a lot of this book listening to it, being pretty sure I knew kind of which character was talking about which kind of thing and what kind of their personality was, but also not really caring too much because I was like, I'll stick to knowing who the main characters are, and I'll stick to knowing certain things about them, but I'm not gonna memorize everybody to kind of figure out what the mystery of this book is. I'm just along for the ride. This book, as you might guess, is about Gideon. Gideon works for this queen in the Ninth, and the queen is a necromancer. Gideon doesn't have these powers, but is very excellent with a sword. And when push comes to shove, ends up having to go with this queen to a different world because she has been invited with other people from other worlds to compete in this collegiate academic necromancer thing. That's basically what you need to know. That was my knee. I really liked Gideon as a main character because she's sassy. She's obviously going through a lot because the person that she works for really doesn't treat her very well, and she just wants to, like, literally have any other job, and that's just not happening. And there's some clever turns here, there, and everywhere, especially when it comes to fighting and deception, and I found this really interesting. Will I continue the series? I'm not quite certain. Like, I got this one done and I'm like, you know what, I'm okay with how this ended. Like, there was a big thing that happened at the end of this that makes it very interesting to go on, but I don't know if I'm going to do that anytime soon. But that's mostly because I'm bad at continuing a series, not because I'm not interested in actually continuing. So if you think I should consider continuing it sooner rather than later, let me know down below. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down in the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye! But that very soon will be in 2026, which is wild.